Okay, everyone, so we'll make a start. I would like to give our speaker, Dr. Stephen Asatsa, a very warm welcome to Queens University Belfast and indeed to Northern Ireland. Stephen is a consultant counselling psychologist by background, and he is a senior lecturer at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa, and that's in Nairobi in Kenya. Stephen is over in the UK for a month, so the whole month of September, where he's staying with collaborators in Durham. So I'm absolutely delighted that he was able to come across and visit with us today, and he's going to speak about a project that he's PI on, which is around mourning rituals and decolonization of psychology in Africa. So without any further ado, Stephen, I'll hand over to you, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Prof. You'll help me to move the slides. So. Okay. Yeah, so I want to begin my presentation. I think I've been introduced already. And the title of my presentation is Towards Decolonization of Psychology in Africa, Insights from Luhya Traditional Mourning Rituals. So I am a lecturer at the Catholic University. I'm also a practicing counseling psychologist and a researcher. So I'm able to integrate research, practice, and theory together. And the presentation that I'm going to make stems from a number of different aspects in the way psychology is taught. I want to bring the paper or the report that is before you to your attention. This is a report from the APA. This is after many decades of people from different parts of the world complaining that the psychology, as we teach it, as we practice it, it has its own dark history, and that psychology has been used in the past to propagate racism and discrimination. So after a number of years of complaints, the APA published this report, which is on their website, and I would be inviting us to find time and read the whole report and see how the APA itself is documenting the different ways in which the organization was propagating discrimination. And when we look at how we teach psychology, again, when we teach the history of psychology, this is not a side that we talk about. We teach on how successful psychology has been as a profession, and we highlight how different psychologists have been doing a positive job. But when you analyze this paper, you realize that yeah, there are some aspects around these subjects that really need to be relooked into. And when I look at that paper, first I want to draw you to the attention. You look at that apology. It is apology directed to the population in the United States. And from Africa, we have a colonial history. And so the education system that we have was actually drawn from the colonial masters. And so we have a lot of things in common that we share with the other countries where psychology has been practiced. So the curriculum that we have in Africa, yes, it's very similar to what is offered here and in the United States. And so when you look at APA trying to apologize to the population in the US, and again, it leaves out the population in Africa, I found that also being problematic, because some of the atrocities that they have documented that were committed against people of color, their same atrocities continue to be witnessed in Africa and other regions with the history of oppression. So our curriculum, the theories that we teach, all these are theories that are coming from the global north. And I just wanted to take us through a few areas that I think I draw my conclusion from when I say that psychology is colonized in our region. When we look at the ethical codes, most of the ethical codes we use in Africa, in my own country, I've checked with South Africa, looked at Ghana. If you look at our ethical codes, they are complete replicas of APA. So the ethical standards that APA advocates for, this is what most of our professional organizations are also are advocating. But when I get through, I find some of the ethical standards do not really conform to the culture of the people of Africa. One of them is issues around receiving gifts. The APA seems to be against receiving gifts when you offer psychological services. But when we get to our country or the African populations, giving gifts was and is still one of the most important ways that people normally appreciate. And other helping professions, traditional healers, they still use this method of receiving gifts, but yet the APA says it is harmful. And it's harmful to other populations, but they have never tested it on Africa to see if it's harmful. We have issues around dual relationships. In our context, counseling would be offered by uncles, by aunties, and they would handle matters very, very well. And so when APA comes up and says blanketly, this is dual relationship will affect clients, I think it's an issue that really needs to be looked at with a lot of skepticism. There is the issue of use of psychological tests. Most of the tests that are used are developed outside Africa, and so they just come to be imposed on the populations in Africa. And so we try to look at some of these tests when we offer them in clinical settings. We feel when we make major decisions about diagnosis using these tests, there are aspects of culture that we are disregarding. Some of them that might make us to arrive at wrong diagnosis, which means we will also offer wrong treatment. I've already highlighted the theories of psychology that are in use in Africa. Most of them are imported. We still teach Sigmund Freud as the father of psychology. We still teach Jean Piaget cognitive psychology. And one of the things we've really been questioning around these theories, some of them have techniques that cannot be applicable to our population. When, for example, we analyze the cognitive development theory by Jean Piaget, you find this is a theory that was developed when he studied his 4 children. And we're asking ourselves, could the experiences of his 4 children be generalized to the whole of our population in Africa? So would we look at this theory with more skepticism? And then one other area is our diagnostic systems, the DSM-5, the ICD-11. Most of these diagnostic manuals, they pathologize many things, and some of the things, as we will see, hallucinations. And I just picked out hallucination as one of the issues that we find having a big problem in those manuals. For example, in our culture, when people are having hallucinations and hearing voices of people who died, sometimes it's not a pathology, it has a meaning. If you follow the meaning from the voice, you'll get a different thing from being a pathology. And then we look at publications. Again, we know very well most publications in psychology, they come from the global north, and this is very highly skewed. And some of the reasons that we have few publications coming from the global south, we are a collective society, and sometimes our research methods usually come from mostly qualitative research, and this is something that most journals do not accept. So we feel, yeah, this is an injustice that needs to be relooked at. And when I look at this, then yeah, I would easily run to a conclusion that psychology is actually colonized in our side. And so I want to draw you to the research that I've done and what inspired me to do this research. And I'm looking at two cases here, what I'm referring to as imported diagnosis and imported intervention. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm a practitioner, so I see clients. So sometimes I get to the counseling room and I find things are not working as the books say. When I sit with a client, the sessions do not go as what is written in the books. It's a very different experience. So one of the areas that maybe I want to highlight on is the area that I've mentioned on hearing voices or hallucinations. So I have this client that I've sat with and talked, and I realized my client is hearing voices from the dead. My client has unfinished business with the dead. So what does mainstream psychology say? The DSM will say these are hallucinations, so these people need to be given psychiatric medication so that we can suppress the voices. And again, if I look at Gestalt therapy, it will say handling unfinished business with the dead, we need to do what we call empty chair technique, where in therapy, we have two chairs and my client is seated on one chair and speaking to another chair as if the person who died is seated on that chair. So I try to apply this model to some people in my community, and I find resistance because they are asking me, who am I talking to the chair? Because we are a collective society, and we relate with people, we don't relate with objects. So I find this a technique very, very difficult to apply in my population. But when I get to that population, I realize one of the things we do when we have issues with the dead, we speak to the dead. We can go to the grave and speak to the dead. So when I'm now starting to look at, do I use empty chair technique that people are resisting, or do I take my client to the grave and speak to the grave? Because they identify with speaking to the grave, they believe the person in the grave is hearing them, as opposed to speaking to an empty chair. And so I begin to question and find some of the interventions that are being proposed in the theories do not really go well with our local culture. On hearing the voices, we usually in our communities, when someone died and you can hear their voice or you can dream with them, we don't rush to pathologize. We want to see what is the meaning, what is the voice saying. And sometimes we have resolved these issues when clients follow the voice. If the voice is saying, I am your grandfather, and when I died, you did not slaughter a cow for me, and we pursue and we do the slaughtering of the cow, the client will get healed. And that is a long-lasting intervention as opposed to giving them medication to suppress the voice. So our people would identify more to speaking to the dead than suppressing the dead and putting them aside. Because to this community, even when someone has died, there is still relationship with the dead. And so then what is our study? This is one of the things that is influencing my study. So I've conducted a study for the last 18 months on traditional mourning rituals among the Luhya people. The Luhya is one of the largest communities in Kenya. It's the second largest community in Kenya with about 6 million people. And this is one of the communities that still holds on their traditional values. So when people die, they still go through different rituals. But we find, again, the rituals have been under threat from 3 different areas. Globalization is trying to erase the practice of rituals. Westernization, many people who have gone to school, they tend to say rituals are backwards, and so they need to be abandoned. And we have a big problem with missionization, where the churches are fighting against the rituals. They believe people who are trying to identify with rituals are engaging with the demonic world, so they need to abandon the rituals. And so when we get to the community, people do not see rituals in those perspectives. People still value the rituals. So one of the objectives then that informed our study is what are the therapeutic values of these rituals, if there are any, and what is the role of these traditional rituals in community cooperation, and how are these rituals usually transmitted. So we conducted this study with multiple methods of data collection. So we used focus group discussion, where we selected 45 community elders from 4 clans in that community. And we also had focus group discussions with 30 bereaved adults and 30 bereaved adolescents. So we wanted to see what were the experiences of participating in the rituals. The community elders were trying to inform us why were these rituals enacted and what is their role in the process of grieving. We also had interviews with 8 religious leaders because, as I've mentioned, one of the opponents of use of rituals is the church. The church is really against that, and we wanted to see also what is it that they have against this. Then we had adolescent free listings, where we had 40 adolescents. We had behavioral observation. We visited about 20 different funeral ceremonies to observe the different rituals that are done there. Then we also used psychometric surveys. We administered 280 surveys, and these were on subjective well-being. We wanted to give people these surveys to see did participation in rituals in any way relate to subjective well-being or prosocial behavior. And of course, we had our own developed rituals participation screening questionnaire, where different people were asked the different rituals that have been they have witnessed, closely witnessed, or participated in. So in that picture, yeah, that's just one of the rituals that, one of the activities that we are engaging with the community, discussing on how even graves are positioned. There is a way they bury their dead. The heads are supposed to face a lake that is in that particular region, and that has a meaning to them. So we then analyze this data qualitatively using thematic analysis. And also currently we are still running the quantitative analysis, but we have preliminary results. So in total, we have identified 25 rituals that are performed when someone dies in this community. And these rituals have been classified into 3. We have rituals that are performed just after death to the time the person is buried. These are pre-burial rituals. And then usually in this community, people will take like 5 days or 4 days before they are buried. So in those 4 days, these are the 9 rituals that will be performed by the community. Then during burial itself, there are also rituals that are performed. Then after burial, there are other rituals that the community continues to engage in. So the community doesn't just end with burial. The relationship with the dead doesn't end with the burial. Even after that, there are rituals that continue. And we found these rituals spread over a period of between 1 month to 2 years. So you can see even after burial, there are rituals that are still happening even 2 years after. That's when the whole process of grieving is completed. And I just want to share a few, like what is the survey showing in terms of those rituals that we have listed above. When we looked at the rituals, this is people are indicating how do they perform, how do they participate in these rituals. So we can see these are the pre-burial rituals. So you can see rituals like wailing, giving tribute, having a vigil around a fire, which is usually lit in the family when someone dies, grave digging, dressing the deceased, washing the deceased. Those are rituals of handling the body, speaking to the deceased. You can see how they are performed. With most, you see the top rituals being performed more frequently by more members of the society. The lower rituals are a bit specialized. You can see the last ritual, I'll talk about it later, beating the corpse, especially when the person has died of suicide. We'll look at how the community treats this person. So you'll see the numbers reducing, the number of members of community reducing as we go down, because the lower rituals are highly specialized. Now, during burial, yeah, these are also the rituals and the frequencies in which people participate in them. We have dancing for people who are highly respected in the community, After burial, there are dances that happen that are accompanied even with bullfighting, eating, and great celebration. So that's changing over from a sad mood just after burial to celebration, because this is a respected person who has died. We have rituals of burying people in hidden places, like outside the compound, burying people at night, burying of banana stems to represent a body that is missing. Maybe someone died and the body cannot be found. There are rituals where people are buried with a sword, and also piercing the penis of a man who has died without children. We'll be expounding on that shortly. Post-burial rituals, these are memorial services, sharing of deceased property, shaving the hair, cleansing of tools that were used for burial, traditional preaching, destroying the deceased's house, and usually we have rituals around sexual cleansing. We'll talk about that. So I'm going to talk about a few rituals now deeper, and what they meant. On this, the QR code that is there, if you scan that, it will take you to a YouTube link you can watch after the presentation. Now, this ritual is about bringing the spirit of the deceased back home. This community believes when someone dies away from home, when you carry the body from where they died to home and bury the body, you have still not completed the burial. This person, you need to go and now bring the spirit back home. So usually people visit the exact place where someone died. If it was in a hospital or it's a road accident that happened, people will visit that place 1 month after burial. They pick some items there. It can be a stone or something, and they speak there and tell the spirit of the person, please follow us, we go back home. And the burial is never complete until that ritual is performed. So the link that I've given there, this is our vice president. He died in 2003, and he died in a hospital here in London. So they brought the body home buried. Now on that link, you'll see the family coming back to London to pick the spirit back home. And they left London with a small box, and they believe now that his part that was remaining in the United Kingdom has now been carried to Kenya. That's when they believed now the whole process is complete. And we find this very therapeutic because it gives people who are struggling with denial. If someone died and people are struggling with denial, visiting the exact places of death and witnessing what happened, that can help people to deal with negative feelings around denial. We have burial of banana stem. This is for ambiguous deaths. When someone dies and the body cannot be retrieved, like someone was killed in a military combat and the body got lost, or it was swept away by a river and it will never be found, or someone died and a wild animal ate the body. The family will not continue searching for the body, or the body got lost. The family, at some point, they normally reach a point and say, we have to get closure. So they will come together, organize a funeral, do all the ceremonies that are supposed to be done, dig a grave, but then in the grave they bury a banana stem, and that closes the searching process. So you can see this is one way the community is coping with continuous searching of the body without an end. We have rituals around speaking to the deceased. It's a very common practice, but it's normally done to give people special instructions. So when someone has died, one of the most common areas where the dead is spoken to, if someone dies and there was unfinished business, an example is this person had a problem with the family and they had not made peace. In this community, when you make peace with people, you greet, you shake hands. That's a ritual of like saying, now we have buried the hatchet, we are together. So if the person died and peace had not been reached, the family will organize around that person before he's buried. Whoever was in difference with this person, they'll go there, elders come, speak words and tell the person who is dead, like, please forgive this person. Then they shake hands. They make this one to shake hands. And when that is done, it's believed the person who died has forgiven. And it will really help the one who is surviving to continue living a peaceful life. This can also be done when people are just crying in a funeral. people normally cry and utter words. So they ask, you'll hear people asking, if it's a woman asking her husband, who have you left the children with? Who have you left me with? And I think this is a way of just venting out and expressing the grief around the whole issue. And when grief is expressed, of course, it's a healthy process. Then when we are burying people who have been murdered, I'll be talking about it later, that's also areas where the speaking is done. There is this ritual for beating the deceased. In this community, suicide is highly prohibited. And this is one of the rituals that is very controversial. So when they find people, someone who has hanged on a tree or he committed suicide, the first time the community does, they beat that person as a way of punishing him, like, and detaching his spirit from the family and telling the spirit, please don't come back to the family, because the method you used to die was not a good method. So it's like forcefully separating the spirit of the deceased from coming back to the community. And usually these people are not named. In this community, children are named after people who died. But if someone who dies of suicide, the community prohibits naming them. So children cannot be named because they believe they can carry along the spirit of this person. And then other rituals around shaming the dead. Yeah, when people, like this person we've talked about for suicide, a suicide person is buried at night and the community is prevented from attending the funeral. Very few people are supposed to go to that funeral. Children and women are not allowed to attend that funeral, only elderly men. And it's assumed it's a way of protecting the children. Usually the grave of people in this community, when people are buried, the grave is made in a way that it leaves a heap of soil. You can easily identify the grave. But for suicide people, the grave is not supposed to be left as a heap. They will flatten and ensure there is no, you cannot easily identify this is where the person is buried. It's a way of trying to forget that person so that other people in the community cannot copy that behavior. Children are not also supposed to be named, and it's assumed suicide is contagious. So more, if people go to the funeral and see this person who died and how he died, people are likely to repeat the behavior, which is something I got from literature that is supporting actually suicide being contagious. Then we have retaliation rituals. When someone dies and they don't know who killed the person, this is a murder case. They don't know who killed the person. People just killed this person and we found the body dead. The community doesn't just bury this person. The person will be buried first at night. But during burial, the community buries this person with a sword. So they give him a sword in one hand and a torch in another hand. And the people burying him tell him to avenge his own death. So they tell him, go after the killers and destroy them. So in this way, the family believes the person then will take over the justice process by themselves. And so even if the case goes to court, but the family believes the person who died also has the power, because now he's in the spirit world, he has the power to know who killed him and he can actually go for these particular people. And families that have gone through this ritual, they feel at one point the person will look for the killers and kill them. And this is a way that they feel helped. They feel the person will take over the revenge mission and accomplish it themselves. Then we have rituals around family preservation. We've talked about people who die without children and also issues of fidelity in marriage. Now, when a spouse dies, a woman is supposed to showcase her faithfulness to the husband who has died by, in the funeral, she's supposed to wear his coat and carry his walking stick, dance with it. If the woman does that, the community believes if the woman does this and she was not faithful, then she will die. And if a woman who was not faithful is asked to do that ritual, then she will not be able to do. So this then regulates the society. When they are alive, they say we would rather be faithful because during burial, we don't want to be ashamed. Likewise, the men who are unfaithful to their wives, they are not allowed to look inside the grave of the wife when she's being buried. It's also believed the man will die if he looks in the grave. So when a man is looking in the grave, then you can confirm he's publicly declaring that he was faithful. And sometimes we used to find people in this ritual, some people normally fake fainting. So if someone knows they were not faithful, instead of being ashamed by not looking in the grave, they will pretend they are fainting. So they are carried away. Nobody will know it was an issue of unfaithfulness. So that's another very controversial rituals. We have rituals around fertility. Children, people who are childless, and they were like they had reached the age of getting children or being married, and they die without children. They are buried in a different way. So for unmarried men, their penises are pierced with a thorn, so that this spirit of being childless and depopulating the community will not haunt other young men. For women who are divorced and they chose to go back to live with their parents, when they die and they are supposed to be buried in their parents' land, they are not buried in front of the houses where other graves are normally placed. This grave is supposed to be hidden behind the houses. So you can see again the differences in how the different genders are treated. So these rituals are meant to push people to rally around being in a family and ensuring the community remains communal. Those are the things that the community is doing. So we then compared, these are just preliminary results for comparing the rituals and community pro-social behavior. So you'll see a bit of slight positive correlation between participation in the rituals and pro-social behavior. As we can see, most rituals in this community, they involve communication. They are not done individually, they are done in groups. It's a collective process. It requires a lot of engagement, talking to one another. So that's why you see the people who reported participating in rituals, they tend to exhibit more pro-social behavior than those who least participated in the rituals. So that's the preliminary results that we are getting from the study. We are still doing more specialized the analysis that will be able to appear in some of the papers that we are preparing from this study. And so what is the conclusion from these rituals? We find in this community, grief is a collective process. It's never an individual process. So when one person dies in the community, the whole community stops what they are doing and come to support the grieving family. The rituals are highly structured. So you'll see when there are rituals that happen before burial, after burial, even beyond burial, and rituals are participatory. People do not just stand and watch. People are supposed to engage in the rituals. There are some that people don't engage in, but most rituals you'll find people are doing. They are not being told about. And so you'll see the community presenting itself with very strong continuing bonds with the dead. They don't abandon the dead, and when people die, they still continue relating with them. And that's why we are going very slow in terms of pathologizing prolonged grief, because to them, prolonged grief may not be pathology. They are still continuing to relate with the person who died even beyond a year. And when you go to diagnostic manuals starting to put certain limits like 1 year or 6 months, then you see it's going against what the community believes in. And rituals are preventive, not reactionary. So you'll see when a funeral happens, people just go through these rituals, and there are very few cases of grief complications in the rural areas where these kind of rituals are happening. So you'll find most issues that arise with complicated grief are in urban centers where a person dies and they bury, the following day they have forgotten about the person. So if we realize the ritual is a way the community is using to buffer and to protect itself against developing complications with grief. So what steps are we carrying forward as we finish? We have this approach that my group is using. We have an NGO that is looking at indigenous knowledge. We've set up this NGO and we are trying to engage the community, because we are saying we cannot just talk decolonization and not act. So what we are doing is our research center is looking at now doing cultural schools for adolescents where they are taught by community leaders on the cultural competence of their communities. And this is done across different communities so that we don't pick the cultural values of one community to impose on others, but we get elders from communities to teach their own adolescents so that we can have this cultural awareness. We are documenting cultural knowledge from communities, and we are also starting to link with universities to identify students who are interested in researching on indigenous knowledge and giving them mentorship and telling them, yeah, this is the way to go, so that we can bring this knowledge, so that we can have evidence for this. So my last slide is on, yeah, what do we do? What should we do? There is need, because we've seen there has been a lot of dominance of the psychological methods that are using in the North without really involving what is the knowledge that can also come from the South. And we are recommending a more collaborative research between the North and the South. There is quite a lot of knowledge that can come from the two sides. We have knowledge that has been flowing from the North to the South, but we believe there is knowledge that can also flow from the South to the North, to even to enrich the existing mainstream methods in psychology. We want to also enhance research just beyond the quantitative, because in our community, people are more relational. So interviews and focus group discussion tend to elicit a lot of data compared to just the numbers that we rely on in quantitative study. So we are also working with the inclusion of indigenous healers in the diagnosis process and the treatment. After getting the opinion of psychiatrists, psychologists, and doctors on issues, we also would get opinion of religious, like traditional leaders, like what, as such a case, what would it mean when someone is going through such a mental health crisis? What would it mean for this community, in this community? So their perspective is also very important in helping to widen and to enrich the treatment process. So that was my presentation, and I welcome any questions from the audience.